Hello everybody, welcome to Liverpool's Perfect Crime event. We were of course supposed to have been meeting in person, but COVID's put place to that, but it is of course going to be taking place next year. I'm the crime writer Sarah Ward, and I'm delighted to be talking to Ann Cleeves, the author of over 30 novels, including the best-selling series featuring Vera Stanhope, set in the northeast of England, the D.I. Jimmy Perez set on the Shetland Isles, and her latest series featuring Matthew Venn, set in North Devon. As you all know, both the Vera and the Shetland books have been made into successful TV series. She's also the 2017 recipient of the CWA, the Crime Writers Association, Diamond Dagger. We're going to be hello, Anne.
Hello, lovely to be talking to you again.
And you. We're going to be talking today about her latest book, The Darkest Evening, her ninth novel featuring the wonderful Vera Stanhope. Everyone here, I'm sure you're all very familiar now with Zoom. There's a chat bar there at the end, at the bottom of your screen. Please feel free to introduce yourselves, and also I'll stop in about half an hour to take some questions from yourselves. So if there's anything you want to ask Anne, please feel free to type it in the chat bar and I'll pick it up. I also wanted to say that Anne's publishers, Pan Macmillan, have kindly donated 2 hardback copies of The Darkest Evening. So we'll be pulling 2 audience names out of the hat who will receive those copies. And the winners will also be announced on the website. So hello to everybody. Anne, I want to start by asking you. So we last had a talk in February, and we were talking about the Matthew Venn set in North Devon. So I'm assuming that you wrote the books in the sequence that they were published. So what was it like having created this new cast of characters with Matthew Venn, completely new landscape, to return to Vera?
Oh, it was really like coming home. It was terrific. And I've always done that. So before writing Matthew, I wrote the Shetland books. And I do like alternating, because there is a sense that you've finished one book, and I think I would find it quite daunting to go back and start another one straight away, whereas I finished the Matthew one and thought, oh, now I can go home and spend a bit of time with Vera. So it's very reassuring to be able to do that, I think.
And is it slightly easier to write about that landscape because it's where you're familiar with, it's near where you live and so on? Because I remember you saying you did quite a lot of research for the Devon set book.
Yeah, I suppose it's more about digging into my memory for the Devon books, because I did grow up in North Devon, so it wasn't quite home territory, but it's digging back into the past, and that's quite fun as well, because it gives you a chance to relive very happy times for me, because I loved it there. But no, it is easier to write about Vera because it's where I live, and I'm speaking in the hills now up in Northumberland, and that's very much where The Darkest Evening is set. So definitely drawing inspiration not just from the landscape but the communities up here.
You've said before that you're a big fan of classic crime fiction, so the golden age of crime fiction, and a lot of most of your books do have that sort of classic feel to them in terms of the investigation and the denouement and so on. But particularly in the Darkest Evening, there's a really strong classic crime feel to it. There's a big house, there's family secrets, there's a possibly murky will, heirs that are appearing, plus the initial snowy landscape. Could you give those who are watching us a glimpse into the plot of The Darkest Evening, and was that golden age feel deliberate?
Yeah, I think it was, because if you're writing a Christmas story and in a big country house, that's bound to resonate, isn't it, with Agatha Christie, and just that sense of nostalgia, really, which I think we all have when it comes to Christmas, and perhaps even more this year because we're not sure that we're going to be able to do it. So there is this idea of looking back into the past and childhood, and yeah, so that's I was certainly referring to that. But it starts off with Vera driving home from work and in a blizzard, and is convinced that she'll make it because that's how she is, you know, that very overconfident, rather arrogant. But the snow is so fierce and so thick that she gets disorientated and loses her way. and ends up not entirely sure where she is, and then comes across a car by the side of the road and thinks that it's slewed off the track. And we're talking wild here, right in the middle of the forest. I'm quite near Kielder Forest, so that big expanse of spruce and Scotch pine, and goes out to help. The driver's door is open and she thinks there might have been an accident. The car seems uninjured but undamaged, and she's just about to drive off when she hears a cry and finds a toddler strapped into the back seat, and then picks the toddler up and drives on, and finally realizes that she recognizes where she is, and she's by Brockburn House, which is where her dad, who was the second son of minor aristocrats, grew up. So, and that's where we start.
Great, no, that's great, and lots of things to talk about there, but I want to start talking about landscape. Because landscape's obviously really important for all your novels, and I can see how they appeal to both those who are, it's unfamiliar. So there's always a slight edge to the landscape. It's not comforting or safe, but also those who know the countryside really well. You provide lots of details, so it's not just an owl that hoots; it's a tawny owl that hoots. It's not just not just a tree, a copse of trees. It's the spruce trees or whatever. How important is the landscape in your books?
I think it is, but it's not. I hope it doesn't just provide a pretty backdrop to the action, because I think we people, I'm mostly interested in the people rather than the natural history, but I think people grow out of the place where they were born and the friends that they played with, and so it's more about place as community that I'm most interested in, I think. And certainly this bit of Northumberland can be a bit feudal still, and exploring that I suppose almost a sociology of the big house and the tenant farmers who are dependent but also maintain that situation, the responsibilities and obligation that come with owning land. I'm interested in all that, and it's fun to explore it in the book as well.
It's true because when you all your books, you depict the whole community. So from the title people right down to the underclass. Remember in the Long Call, there's people who are on the sort of really struggling to survive. Is that important to you to depict the whole range of people working in the countryside, living and working in the countryside?
Yeah, with this book it was, I think, because they're all interesting, aren't they? And they're all individuals, and they all feed into the story. And maybe that's the difference between writing today about the countryside and writing in the 30s, because then you might get the odd butler or housemaid, but they were very much figures of fun or walk-on characters, whereas actually they were the people who were propping the whole thing up and were keeping it going. And if there wasn't somebody there to light the fires in the morning, everybody would be fairly chilly.
Yeah, and I suppose it's also looking beyond these sort of quite a few of the places you talk about are very touristy areas, aren't they? Like Shetland and North Devon, and it's looking beneath what you see on the surface, really, isn't it?
Yeah, it's the people who prop it all up, I think, and make it what it is. And it's just nosiness. I'm just fascinated by it. My daughter, I've said before, I think is a human geographer, and her research is all about just talking to people about community and the places where they live, and what holds the community together and what tugs it apart. And looking especially, I suppose, at this time in the middle of COVID, looking at inequality, at who it is that is suffering most and who manages to float past quite nicely. And I think we do, because we work from home and it's pleasant, and it's not very different, is it? It's fine if you've got somewhere nice to work, and it's all right. But I'm more interested in the people perhaps who are struggling a bit.
Should we talk a little bit about Vera now? We could talk about Vera for the whole 40 minutes, couldn't we, really? For me, she represents all sort of women over 50 who are ignored, patronised, dismissed. You wait for her, well, I wait for her reaction when one of your characters tries to patronise her or ignore her, and just wait for her reaction. Is it just me, or does she really appeal to older readers?
I think she does appeal to older readers, but it's surprising how many younger people enjoy her too. I think because the television has made it so much more popular, and there are younger people who watch not just for Brenda, but for Kelly Doughty, who plays Aidan, and for the plots too. But yeah, and I think, again, younger people are drawn to the books because it's a show on a Sunday evening that the whole family can watch. So I'm just very, very lucky about that. But it was nice writing her, to think that I was writing for an audience that had perhaps been underrepresented before, for readers who hadn't been able to read about people like them. You know, that I love Sarah Paretsky's books, for instance, if we're talking about feminist crime writers. But V.I. Warshawski, she might not be in the first flush of youth, and she might not be drop dead gorgeous, but she can still pull a bloke, you know, and she's still fairly fit. She's out there jogging first thing in the morning after she's been up all night. So I suppose I wanted an antidote, someone who was a bit more like me, like lazy.
It was Sarah Paretsky that first got me into sort of crime fiction from the golden age. I remember picking up one of the early V.I. Warshawski books, and I was just blown away by the character.
Oh, she's just terrific. She is still one of my favourite writers. And when I was programme chair at Harrogate, I was so thrilled when she agreed to come and be my guest of honour there.
Oh, brilliant. There's a scene in the book where Vera's on the phone, and the person who's found Lorna's body comes in wanting to use the phone, and she says, and I won't do the accent, "Sorry, pet, this is important." And I could just hear Brenda Blethyn speaking the lines. How much of her portrayal of Vera has affected your writing of the character?
Yeah, I think, to start with, you know, I was quite... I thought, no, I'm just going to keep in my head, my Vera will be mine. But she's so good at doing those witty put downs that I do definitely hear her voice when I'm writing dialogue now. I think my Vera is slightly edgier and bigger.
Yeah, I can put her as bigger. Yeah. Yeah,
and not quite so gentle. But yeah, I think they've merged really. So we do. Brett and I talk about her as our Vera now.
So there's a question from Brenda. I assume it's not Brenda Blethyn, but is Brenda Blethyn your ideal Vera?
I think so, yeah. And I would never have said, you know, if somebody said, who do you picture as Vera? It would never have been Brenda Blethyn, because she's amazingly elegant in real life. And she's from the South, and I'd seen her obviously in things like Secrets and Lies and Little Voice, and play Mrs. Bennet, and in Pride and Prejudice, but I also saw her in quite a subversive sitcom called Outside Edge, about a village cricket team ages and ages ago. So I knew she could do humour, and I knew she could do drama beautifully. So when they suggested her, I thought, well, that's a really interesting casting. And then I was invited to the first read through, when they all came up to the Northeast to do when all the cast got together to read through the first script. And I think I was so nervous, because, you know, she was a double Oscar nominee, she was so famous, and here she was playing this character that I created. And apparently she was equally nervous that I was there watching. So that was fun.
In this book, in each of the Vera books, you give a little bit more of her backstory. We know about her father, but in this one, we get quite a lot more of Vera's backstory. So Hector's estrangement from the Stanhope family. And what's quite interesting is that, because you get this backstory, you could actually start reading the series. If people hadn't read the Vera books, you could start with this book, because you get quite a lot of backstory about Vera. Was that deliberate, or did it just feel a natural thing to do because you were setting it in the ancestral home of Vera's family?
Yeah, I don't really plan or plot anything before I start writing. I'm not that sort of a writer. And so it developed as I was writing. But it did seem a good time to fill in that backstory, which I think I always knew, but it was good to give the readers those details. I can, again, going back to the television, I can remember when Brenda was first cast, the director asked me, she wanted, because of the way that she worked, she wanted all those details. So I had written them down before, but just in a sort of briefing note for her. And although they've never really come up in the TV scripts, I think she enjoys knowing those things.
There's a really moving scene in the book where there's a dead body, won't say who it is, but it's in a woodland sort of clearing, and Vera spends hours with the body waiting for help to arrive, and you see her frailty there. Is Vera getting old?
She's not aging in real time, because I still want to write about her, and I think she was 21 this year, actually, because the first Vera book came out in 1999. So
how old do you think about?
Oh, she's still in her mid-50s, I think, and will stay there. You know, I'm not doing I think Ian Rankin made a huge mistake when he aged Rebus in real time, because he had to retire him and then bring him back in all sorts of other ways. So no, she's aging very slowly.
Very good. The darkest evening of the titles are always very important. They seem to be with your books, because of the long call was the bird. Was that right? The bird song?
Yeah, the herring gull cry of the herring gull. Yeah.
And you've got the darkest evening, which relates to the winter solstice. So it's not just a Christmas book; it's a sort of winter solstice book. And there is a darkness to the novel. How dark do you go in your books, would you say?
I think that the darkness is probably implied rather than described. I don't go in for gratuitous violence against women. I wouldn't torture children. But I think there is still sometimes a cruelty and, I suppose, an exploration of fear that I'm quite interested in writing about. And yes, we do see Vera very vulnerable in this book, I think, in a way that I've not written about her before.
Yeah, there was a sense of her sort of, because I think because she's quite large and there's a sort of physicality to her, isn't there, that you can imagine her sort of using that bulk to sort of get things done. And she came across as quite frail in that scene. Yeah,
I think so. But I think if I'd been out in the snow with a dead body, and you talked about it being in a wood, but I wrote that scene after having been for a walk in the forest here, and when the Forestry Commission come in and clear fell, it did remind me almost of First World War, you know, because you're left with the roots sticking up and they're almost twisted like bodies, very grey. It's like looking at bone rather than trees, and so that coming across a bit of Clearfell, where all the good bits had been stripped and all that were left were these pulled up roots and branches that nobody could use anymore. It did feel, like bone, and so that inspired that scene, writing that scene.
It's a very evocative place, as is the large house, and there's a small cottage, sort of a derelict cottage that plays a role in the plot. Are they real life places as well?
No. Not the house, not Brockburn or the cottage. So no, it's all made up.
That's good. Just before we move on to your other books, Vera's detective colleagues, Joe Ashworth, Holly, they play a sort of different role in each of the books. So Holly seemed very much to the fore in this book. Joe's wife isn't happy with his relationship with Vera. She keeps calling him at unsociable hours. Do you try and vary the dynamic between Vera's detective team in each book?
Again, not consciously, I think, but it seemed, because it was very much about Vera being a bit more vulnerable, to have another single woman playing a role in it seemed appropriate this time.
Mm.
And Holly, who is also single, childless, but much more physically active and much more physically competent, I suppose, and knocking against this boss who doesn't fit in with her idea of how a boss should be, because she's younger and because, you know, she's, I suppose, more used to conventional management. Coming across Vera with her shambolic lifestyle and her endless cups of tea and her drinking on duty and all that, I think was quite fun to write.
I think we both we identify with Vera, but we also identify with Holly, you know, having a boss like Vera, don't we, really?
It wouldn't be the easiest, would it?
No. So that's Vera, and as I mentioned, Pan Macmillan are giving away 2 copies. So do please put your names in the say hello in the chat bar if you'd like to be entered into the draw. So the long call, going to your most recent Matthew Venn book. It's Waterstone's paperback of the year, I saw on Twitter.
Yeah, that's pretty cool, isn't it?
Yeah, no, it's excellent. And do you want to say a little bit about how that came about? Because you mentioned at the beginning of the talk, so you grew up in the North Devon landscape. It's not something that you'd written about, I don't think, before. Had you?
No, one short story, I think, but no, certainly not a novel. Yeah.
So what made you set your book, set a series there?
Well, I'd finished Shetland. I knew that I would write no more Shetland books, and I knew that I wanted something to alternate with the Vera because I wanted something a little bit different. Mm-hmm. And then, yeah, my husband died quite suddenly, and I ran away down to stay with my best friend, someone I'd known since I was 11 and started grammar school, and went and stayed with Sue, and just talking to her and going around and all those memories of school days, all the happy memories coming back, mm-hmm. Sort of triggered thoughts, I suppose, not so much about plot, but about character. Mm-hmm. And it seemed to me, we were talking about somebody who'd grown up within a very strong evangelical Christian community, mm. and about just thinking about what it would be like if you lost your faith. And in that community, you would be cast out, so you would be unfellowshipped, so you would lose touch with your friends and family. Mm. And then thinking that if that had happened, maybe joining the police service would be almost like a substitute community. You know, you'd have the same sense of duty and honor, and perhaps redemption as if you still had your faith. And so that's how Matthew was born, really. And then that wonderful marginal community of North Devon, where again it's a long way from the centre, like Northumberland, and it's multi-layered communities. So people who come, and wealthy schoolboys who come for the surfing and the arty bunch, but also that, as you say, the people who have to service them, so the drifters who come and work in the big hotels or work as chambermaids, or so it was an interesting community to write about.
Because you mentioned the religious community that Matthew grows up in. So I think I mentioned to you when we met before, my father was from the Plymouth Brethren. So, but it was the community was an amalgam of different.
I made it up. I call them the Baron Brethren because Baron was the Russian the Roman name for Barnstaple, which is where part of the action is set. So yeah, I call them the Baron Brethren. And then of course Matthew's gay, so reconciliation with the family is going to be even more tricky and I loved writing the marriage between Jonathan and Matthew. It's the first time I've ever had happy married couple in my book. that was great to write, and I've just finished a new Matthew Venn story now, so that's been fun to go back to them.
Yeah, that was my next question, really. So there's another Matthew Venn book coming. Is that your?
Yes. The first draft is finished, and so so we'll see how that goes down. But
does it have a title yet you can share with us, or is it?
No, nothing definite at all yet. It's still in editorial, but it is at least got that far.
And how was it writing a completely new set of characters, a new location which you knew well, but creating this whole, because you're although you usually have a main detective, they're very much ensemble detective work, isn't it? It's not just one character, it's the detectives around that central character. How daunting, I mean, I know obviously you're a very experienced writer, but how daunting was it to set up a whole new police team?
I think it was the right time to do it, because it was like I wanted a fresh start. I wanted something different to do. And as you say, it is more of I think the Matthew Venn books are even more of an ensemble piece, because I'm not just writing about the police team, I'm also writing about Matthew's husband Jonathan and his work. And there's a recurring character who's a young woman with Down syndrome who is called Lucy Braddock in the book. So she appears in the second book as well. So that's been fun, just exploring those relationships again. And it's set in midsummer in a heat wave, so very different from The Darkest Evening.
Yeah. And you're predominantly known now for writing series. So you know, Vera and the Shetland and so on. Do you have a standalone you'd love to write, or do you very much like returning to the characters?
Yeah, at the moment I'm enjoying writing the series. I've written 2 standalones, Burial of Ghosts and The Sleeping and the Dead. And The Sleeping and the Dead especially, I think, is okay. You know, it was written quite a long time ago, but I'm quite pleased with it. So I don't have there isn't anything that I want to do with a standalone at the minute that I can't do with a series book. And if that time comes, then certainly I would consider writing another standalone, but not at the moment.
And that's how you see the future, one Matthew Venn, because at one point it was obviously one Vera, one Shetland, so one Matthew Venn, one Vera. Yeah,
certainly at the moment, because I've still got plenty of stories in each. The great thing about writing Vera is that here in the Northeast there's such a wide variety of backgrounds. You know, I can set a story in a former pit village where there's a addiction problem, or I can set it in a small market town with minor aristos in a big country house like in The Darkest Evening. So there is that possibility of writing about, again, the whole range of different communities, and that will keep me writing about Vera, I think, and keep her at the same age and not quite retired.
Excellent. Please do, for those watching, please do type in your questions into the chat bar, because I'll be opening up to questions. Normally when I do it in front of an audience, we open it up to the audience, but we'll be using the chat bar. This morning when I told friends that I was interviewing you, Anne, and people said, ask her about Vera, the TV series. Are there going to be more Vera?
There are going to be more Vera. They're filming at the minute. So despite COVID, they're just being really, really careful. So normally I would go to the read through and I would sit round when they went, and just, you know, lots of hugs and meeting up with everybody again. All that was done by Zoom, of course, and now I think they're just being so careful. All the extras have to have tests, and then they go and isolate in a hotel room for 10 days before they go on set. Kenny and Brenda are in a bubble, so they can still meet up. But, the rest of them are very separate. So yes, but they are filming again. I think they're filming the second episode of series 11, and then they'll film 4 more after Christmas. So there will be 6 more episodes on their way at some point in the future, all being well. But it's brought a real sense of hope up here. People are so excited to see Vera filming again in quite sort of gloomy, grim times. It is a bit of normality, and we're very grateful for them to it must be quite scary coming up to do it. Of
course, yeah.
And for the cast and crew who are being so very, very careful.
That's excellent. And Matthew Venn's been optioned as well, hasn't it?
Yes, so we'll wait and see what happens with that. I haven't got anything new to tell you about that at the minute.
Okay.
There is the script being written, and we'll just have to wait and see what happens.
That's brilliant. It's been lovely to talk to you, Anne. So I'm going to take some questions from the chat bar, because there's quite a few great questions. So this is from Pat Page. Why has Anne chosen not to write any more Shetland novels?
I think 8 was enough. I wanted to stop while I was still enjoying writing and while readers were still enjoying reading. And I think and there will be more Shetland television as well for those of you who love Shetland. They were all set to go before the first lockdown. The crew were actually in Shetland ready to film, and then had to be sent home. But they will be up in the spring to film more. But in the stories that they're writing, they were sending their police officers off to Norway and down to Glasgow. My focus was very much on the islands, and after 8 I thought I'd done enough. There are only 23,000 people who live in all the Shetland Islands, so I was ready to do something different.
Right. This is from Mary. She says, possible spoiler. Oh dear. Since Jimmy moves off Shetland at the end of the Shetland books, is there a chance he'll return in future books in a different locale?
Probably not in a novel, but maybe in a short story.
Okay. Yeah. I see him very much based on Shetland. It'd be interesting how he was elsewhere, really. This is from Lynn. Can you ask Anne how long she's been writing, and did she ever think of another job?
Oh, I've done lots of jobs, and we need to live so that we've got something to write about. Yeah, what have I been? I've been a probation officer, I've been a bird observatory cook, I've been an auxiliary coast guard, I've worked in public libraries, I've done childcare, helped out in a women's refuge. So yeah, done lots and lots of things. But my first book was published in 1986.
Wow.
And I've written a book a year ever since.
Really? So, gosh,
yeah.
That's not bad going, is it?
Not bad, but I love it. I mean, I don't know about you, Sarah, but I really love it. My favourite bit is sitting at the kitchen table early in the morning and making things up.
Yeah, I'm a morning person as well. After lunch, no, that's it. But no, it's the sort of slightly dark mornings doing it. Yeah, no, definitely. Has publishing changed? It must have changed completely since you first were published.
Oh goodness, yeah. And when I first started, I think I just sort of slid under. I just sold enough to be able to still be published the next time, and that was down to public libraries, really. Never saw my books in bookshops, and because libraries had bigger book funds then, they were able to support new writers. And I think we all think about the bad funding for libraries as being horrible for readers, but it's really limiting the breadth of writers too, or limiting the scope for new writers, because there was that support there, and you could always go in and do a talk and make new readers that way. It's tough now.
And I think libraries, as you say, for writers, certainly when I was starting out, they're so welcoming to writers, aren't they? You can go, and sometimes there's only 5 people in the audience. Well, I'm sure you don't get that anymore, but you know,
I've done library events with only one. I've had a very intimate chat with readers in libraries. Not so much now, but certainly in the early days.
Yeah,
but it's great because it gives you a chance to develop your craft, I think, and to meet readers and get an honest response from most library readers. Are very honest about what they think of your books.
Yeah. And one thing I've noticed is sometimes the sort of the older the person, the more violent they like the books as well. You know, it's sort of you get to know your readers, don't you?
Yeah, you do. Yes, it's so important. Yeah.
Very good. There's another question. This is from Ellen. Will we get to know more about Vera's mother's background in future books? So we know about Hector. What about Vera's mother?
Hi, Ellen. Yeah, that would be quite interesting, I think, because all I know about Vera's mum is that she was a village school teacher. And so Hector was really considered to be marrying beneath him. You know, she was, her parents were, I think, in my mind, worked down the pit probably. And so it would be quite interesting to find out a little bit more about her family.
It would. I can imagine a sort of, as you say, a contrast between Hector and Vera's mother. Does she have a name? Do we know her name?
Mary. She's called Mary.
Mary. This is a question. I was just trying to find it because it was a very, very early question early on from Linda Wells. She'd love to know what you think of the actors who portray your characters. Well, you've mentioned Brenda Blethyn, haven't you?
Yeah, and the same with, I've just been so lucky, because the same with Dougie Henshaw, really, because although he doesn't look like the character that I describe in the Shetland books, he plays him brilliantly, because he has that he's very strong, very authoritative, but he has that compassion, that kindness, and it's quite hard for male actors to do that convincingly, I think, to portray both sides of them, and he does it beautifully. And I can't wait to see the new series of Shetland, because they're all original stories now, because they write them as one story over six episodes, so then they're not adaptations.
And who could you see playing Matthew Venn?
I don't know at all. I've been thinking a bit about that, and I can't, so I'm open to suggestions. Anybody got any suggestions about who should play Matthew Venn? That would be really interesting.
Put them in the chat bar if you there's a question, what this is, I think, for both of us, but specifically for you, Anne. What do you think about these Zoom interviews? Do you think that once this pandemic is over, they will continue? I mean, from an interviewer's point of view, it's slightly harder because we don't get to see the audience, and I'm sure it's the same from you being interviewed.
Yeah, and it's not the same, is it, as having face-to-face contact, and you, it's easier with Sarah because I know you and we've chatted before, and that obviously makes it more comfortable. What these Zoom and web interviews do is they're actually much more democratic, because if people can't afford a book festival fee, or they don't particularly want to go out in the evening, or they can't get to you. I'm doing as I said, the Hong Kong Book Festival tomorrow. There are people who certainly wouldn't want to come to Hong Kong to see me speak, but they can listen into that. So yeah, I think we will perhaps do a more blended version in the future, and do a couple of web ones, so that people who can't manage to get to the event can still manage to see it.
Yeah, I can see people, there's somebody here from Los Angeles watching at the moment. I mean, they wouldn't be able to make it to Liverpool
No.
like for your event. And a question from Elaine, it'll have to be the second to final question, I think, because we're running out of time. Do you have a favourite fictional detective?
Oh, so many. He's not really a detective, and I don't like him at all, but I do love Mick Herron's books. So Jackson Lamb is he's just magnificent. What a creation. And just wonderful creation. So if you've not read his books, do. He's like a spy master, but he is so gross.
And they're being filmed, I believe, as well, aren't they?
They are, yes. I think with Gary Oldman as.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
So people are saying they're from Boston in the USA as well, so we've obviously got a big international audience. Ellen has suggested, unfortunately, I don't know either of these actors, Ben Aldridge from Matthew Venn.
Yeah, no, I know Ben Aldridge. He did the audiobooks, and he was in Fleabag, and he was Arsehole Guy, I think, in Fleabag. And he was, what else was in? Our Girl, that thing about the female soldier. I think he was one of the ones in there.
Has he been mentioned before?
He comes from Devon, so he reads the audiobooks.
Oh, so they've suggested him for Matthew. And Elizabeth Berrington as Jen. I'm afraid I don't know Elizabeth Berrington.
No, I'm not sure who she is.
We'll have to have a look.
She needs to be a Scouser, though. We're doing this Perfect Crime from where we would be in Liverpool. I don't care what she looks like, but she needs an authentic Scouse accent, because I need her to be a Scouser.
Anne, it's been absolutely wonderful talking to you. Thank you very much for joining us today and for supporting the Perfect Crime event. And see you next year. Well, I'll hopefully see you before then.
I'm sure I'll bump into you before then. It's lovely to chat to you again.
And you. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. I just wanted to say that the event is going to be shown on the Perfect Crime YouTube channel soon, and you can see that at Perfect Crime UK. It is also the website, and also Perfect Crime UK on Twitter and Facebook. You'll find lots of information about today's event and for the event next year. See you all soon, and thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.